Mark, how old are you?
I just turned 17.
Just turned 17 years old. I've got an 18-year-old son that just turned 18-year-old. I tell you, I'd be so proud if he would just hop up in front of this group, and any group, and give any kind of presentation. But you know your subject matter very well, sir. And I appreciate you coming out to Salina today to have this wonderful talk about this very, very important topic that we're going to be discussing a little bit further with some questions, hopefully. Because this is a process that I really didn't know a whole lot about until about 5 years ago. I got involved with Convention of States kind of by happenstance. Author Mark Levin was putting out this book called The Liberty Amendments, and it really kind of sparked something in my mind. I knew there was a problem in D.C., and I knew that we kept trying to elect good people, and they'd go there, and we weren't getting the results or the things that we sent them there to do. So something was wrong, and it was the mechanism. And as you said, there's a lot of great intentions, a lot of good people that go into Washington. And to your point, I think they have the best of intentions. I think they try to do what they can, but the system is broke. It literally is, and they can't be fixed from within. I've had the pleasure of traveling with former Senator Tom Coburn out of Oklahoma. Some of you might know of him. Retired a few years ago from the United States Senate. He was a congressman from Oklahoma before that, but more importantly, he was a doctor for many years in Oklahoma, delivered over 4,000 babies. But the guy knows Washington, D.C. from the inside out. He was the first one to put out that black book, that fraud, waste, and abuse that is put out every year now from a member of Congress. He was convinced he can't fix it from within, so he left early. He literally left the United States Senate, the most exclusive club in the world, right? He left it early, retired early, and went home. And the thing he said in retirement, which floored me, because I had become part of the Convention of States project, and nobody from our organization or anybody had ever talked to him about this topic, said he was leaving early to work on the Convention of States, because he said he was convinced that was the only way it was going to be fixed. And of course, it was great to have him be a part of our organization. And he's come to Kansas a few times. And again, I've been able to work with him in a couple states, actually 5 different states. And listening to some of the stories that he said that have happened in D.C. and it is more clear to me every single day that no matter who's in in the Oval Office, whomever is in control of Congress, which party, whatever, the solutions can't come from within the Beltway. It has to come from the states. This is the process that the Founding Fathers put within the Constitution, written right into the original text of the Constitution as an action plan for legislators at the state level to utilize. It's the only action plan written into the Constitution for them to follow. And we've never used it. One of my good friends over in Missouri, the former state director over there, puts it like he says the Convention of States is more like a board meeting of the states, of the sovereigns, right? The people, think of it as a church, right? You have a board for your church. And think what would happen with that church if they never had a board meeting. If for 200 years they just operated with the organization elders never meeting and discussing a direction or maybe a correction of course or something along those lines. It's essentially what's happened with our country. It's gone off its constitutional morgue. There's boundaries. There's clearly delineated markers within the Constitution. It was written only to give power to the federal government, and somehow they found things in between the lines of the text. So that's what we're here to do. It's not some kind of rewrite of a Constitution. That's not what this is about. Article 5 is very specific in its wording. It's to propose amendments to the United States Constitution. And again, it's the same power that's given to Congress every single day that they meet. So this process, for those that have fears or something along those lines, what happens when the states meet, and all these outside influences are going to you know, have some weird effect on these individuals that go discuss about reforms and make proposals, you know, and who knows what might happen. Well, this is the same process or the same power that Congress has every day they meet. And believe me, I fear Congress a lot more than I do our state legislature, sending people to this meeting. Essentially, that's all it is, the meeting, to propose reforms. Because I don't trust the people that are going to be reformed to come up with their own restraints. I would much rather trust people from the outside putting restraints on, just as our Constitutional Convention did originally when it drafted the document that we're talking about today. So with that, I'm going to answer some questions. Anybody have questions on the process?
What do we get to talk about in the convention? What kind of amendments do we get to propose?
That's a great question. It depends on the application from the state. And the one we're talking about today has 3 subject matters. The one before you presented that actually was up for a vote a couple of years ago and was actually again in the legislature this last year and will be again this year, is on 3 subject matters. So any proposal that falls within those 3 subject matters can be discussed at a convention. And those 3 subject matters are limited to imposing further restraints on the size, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government. Okay, so that's kind of a biggie right there. So anything that further restricts the federal government's power, essentially, their size, scope, and jurisdiction, can be talked about. So further restricts. You can't expand their authority. So that's one. Second one is fiscal restraints on the federal government. So, you know, anything that we can talk about as far as balanced budget, maybe tax reform, something along those where they're gathering their income, right? And that's where their revenue source, our income tax. You can look at something along those lines. And then the third one is term limits. And I think Representative Clays talked about term limits being something that's near and dear to him. That's something that's near and dear to me as well, but not necessarily only on Congress. We can look at federal officials. So it's not limited to only Congress. It's anybody that holds a federal position, okay? So one could look at the judiciary for one. If the states felt that the Supreme Court doesn't need to live, or doesn't need to die in office to be removed, which isn't in the Constitution, by the way. It's only in time of good behavior. But it is now we have 40-year-olds being appointed, and they serve out 55, 60 years in the court, it seems like, which is not the original intent of that. But if they wanted to look at term limits on federal judges, they could certainly do that. Maybe even have an overturn provision as far as, and that's more on the size, scope, and jurisdiction. They could look at the type of amendments. They could look under the size, scope, and jurisdiction. You could look at maybe what they call a countermand amendment, which would be anything that comes from the federal court, the states, if they had enough of them, 2/3 is normally what I hear, vote, they could overturn a federal ruling, essentially, from the Supreme Court. Because right now what we have is the Supreme Court. Every time they meet, and usually they render their decisions in June, July, whatever. Every time that they hand down one of those decisions, it's essentially an amendment to the United States Constitution. They invent new things. There's several cases that they've effectively amended the Constitution without not going through the proper channels of Article 5. So that's really an oversight that we need to address as well. So those are the type of amendments, anything that would fall within those categories. Now, it is, like I said, it is very specific to the call or the application. So what has to happen is that a resolution has to be passed through the state legislature. It is a joint resolution, concurrent resolution here in the state of Kansas is what we call it. And it has to pass both the House and the Senate. In this case, in Kansas, 2/3 majority has to agree. And then it doesn't go to the governor's desk. It goes straight to Congress. There's been over 400, almost 500 of these applications that have happened in our nation's history. There's only one state in the union that's never sent one. I believe that's Hawaii. Every other state's actually done this process. Yet we've never been to a convention because they've never had 2/3 of the states all agree on what that convention should be. So the application is very important. It has to be nearly identical in 34 states to have a convention called for that very reason stated in that application. So,
I believe you said, or Mark did, that, for example, if Rhode Island sends 2 commissioners or delegates, Kansas sends 5, and California sends 200, still situation of, you have the checks and the discussion, still just have one, because of the sovereign state situation, you just
Correct.
have one vote.
yeah, it's a convention of states, not a convention of commissioners or delegates. And the states can commission however many delegates they so choose, unless they agree beforehand. If they say, okay, we're going to pass this rule amongst the states that you're only going to send 5, you got to figure out which 5 that is. There is no such rule, by the way, so at this point. But if they did, that would be the only way to limit it, and then states would have to agree to it, not any dictation from Congress. Congress has no say in this process. Again, they're sovereign states. The states take precedence in this matter, and they get to set the rules. So, but the one rule that is always universal. It's because they're a meeting of sovereign states or entities. They each get 1 vote in the end. So even though in Congress, California has 54 congressmen in the United States House of Representatives, they only have 1 vote in a convention of states.
How often could this happen? If you get to 34 and you go and you propose it, is it a one-time deal or does it last?
It is based on the application. So each application starts a process. So once you make the 34 states on any one application, that process then stops for that particular application, because then something is triggered. In this case, a call from Congress is required at that point. Because the way Article 5 actually reads, it says Congress shall call a convention. So at that time of the call, those applications for that convention are done. The convention happens and they meet, and it'll continue to meet until they propose their amendments back to Congress for ratification to the states. Congress is required to send it to the states at that point. At the time of them sending that to Congress to propose out to the states, when the gavel drops in that convention's done. They can't do anything more. So if they ever want to do another convention, they have to get 34 states similar enough to call another convention to be held at that point.
Is there an expiration or time limit that you have to get 34 states? Like, will the first 12 that already applied, will their applications expire if another 22 don't get the ball rolling?
It's up to each state to decide